practices during the IB1B.
EB1.
EB1, sorry.
2 seconds. I will try to find the the PowerPoint. Here it is. So, hello everyone. Want to thank the organizers for this important conference and the opportunity to present my research, which is based on my master's degree, which I finished quite long ago. The onset of the early Bronze Age, following the demise of the rich Chalcolithic culture, beginning in the 4th millennium BCE, it was characterized by process of reduction, recovery, and reorganization. The later phase of this period, in the last quarter of the 4th millennium BCE, the EB1B, was characterized by a period of consolidation, rapid growth. One of the main changes seen during the transition between the phases was the increase in the number of settlements and burial sites throughout the southern Levant. These burial sites are the focus of this presentation. So funerary rites, just a second. Funerary rites are significant and important process that allow humans to cope with and adjust to death. Okay. In many societies, they mark the commemoration of the deceased and celebrate the transition from the living community to the ancestral community. The EB1 burial practices are planned and organized. They are systematic in extramural burial sites under and above ground, mostly secondary burials, but also primary examples are known, some, quite rare, and they are multiple and successive. So where do they inter? Spatially speaking, we've got hewn caves in local bedrocks from north to south, all of the country, west, east. This is the most common type of burial site. We've got charnel houses in Babedra, mainly in the EB2 and 3, but starts in the EB1B. We've got dolmens and tumuli in the Upper Galilee, in Ramat Golan. We've got in Transjordan and the Negev. I will use the coastal plain as a test case simply because most of the mortuary data comes from this region. To vast and extensive constructional development took place in this region in the last 100 years, which exposed many of the caves and led to the excavation. Most of the caves and the burial sites are concentrated in the Sharon coastal plain and the central coastal plain. As you can see in this map, brown marks the brown marks the northern coastal plain. The pink marks the Sharon coastal plain, and the green marks the central coastal plain. Many of the burial sites, less than 60%, circa 60%, were founded during the Chalcolithic period. Close to 40% were founded during the EB1B period, while less than 10% were founded during the EB1A period. So let us look at some of the coastal plain burial features. From the point of chambers, in the central coastal plain, we've got single chambers or double chambers, as we can see in the example in front of us, a kidney-shaped or billboard-shaped cave from Azor, which was dug by Bentor in the 70s. In the Sharon coastal plain and the northern coastal plain, the single chamber is the rule. although there are some exceptions, as at Tel Assur Cemetery, Chovat Gilan was dug by Dagan, which he exposed 3 or 4 caves with 2 or 3 chambers. Very rich caves with material culture. The entrance, either sloping or by stairs, as we have another example from Ventor's excavations at Azor. There is no direct access to the burial cave. There is a passage between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Sealing and blocking. In the central coastal plain, all of the caves were found filled intentionally with earth, covering the burial layer from bottom to top. At Azor, Bentor mentions that after they covered the burial layer, some additional offerings were deposited. And then they were covered by intentional fill up to the ceiling. At Tel Assur cemeteries, for example, the Sharon coastal plain, Yanai reports in his excavation report that some of the burial caves were blocked with small to medium sized stones. A rare example is Kfar Glikson, also on the eastern part of the Sharon coastal plain, in which a heap of stones was piled upon the burial layer, and later on the additional offerings were deposited and they were found on the sides of this heap of stone. There is a clear internal architecture in the caves. Stone platforms are known from the northern coastal plain, the Sharon coastal plain, and the central coastal plain. On these platforms, offerings were found, human remains were found, and sometimes both. Here's an example from Moshat in the northern coastal plain, and another example from Chovat Chani in the central coastal plain. The floors of the caves were either smoothened or paved with flagstones or field stones, as you can see in this example from Chovat Chani in the central coastal plain. Here's a rare feature, stone circles, only known from Chovat Gilan, the Tel Assur cemetery, excavated by Dagan, and from Givatayim, excavated by Kaplan. The meaning of these circles is not known, and till date were not fully published. Cremation. Cremation is a large word. It's known from the central coastal plain, with one exception from the Sharon coastal plain. It's by cremation, we mean that there are burned bones inside of the caves. Some were charred, some were half burned, and some were burned in intense fire that led to the discoloration of bones. These bones were placed next to unburned bones. And we don't know if they actually burned bodies or they burned the bones. In addition to that, we can add that in the central coastal plain, in the burial sites, at least in one cave, there are signs of intense fire and thick layers of ash. Burial kit, there is a distinct burial kit, which I'll elaborate later on. And there is a clear connection between the living and the dead. And what I mean by that, that from in the landscape, the burial sites were placed next to settlement sites. There is a clear connection between them. They are close or in proximity to. Here's some examples. They were separated either by topographical saddles, as we know from Palmachim and Azor, or by a stream like we know from Abarot and Tel Ifshar. Another example is Tel Assur, which Itzik will talk about this site later on. This settlement, one of the largest, if not the largest settlement of all in the EB 1B, there are two cemeteries surrounding it. The caves were hewn in limestone hills in the slopes, and they are clearly watching the settlement. The settlement is visible from these burial sites. The southern cemetery was separated from the Tel Sur settlement by the Iran stream. Now, the inhumations, multiple and successive inhumations, dozens to hundreds of interments. Each new interment, the old one was swept aside together with the old offerings, together with the blocking and sealing some of the caves and collapsing. What the result is a continuous reburial, lack of clear stratigraphy, erosion, modern disturbances, and lack of published excavation reports make it almost impossible to present a reliable relation between interments and artifacts in the burial caves. In spite of these difficulties, a clear burial assemblage emerging. And this assemblage could be termed as the EB1B burial kit. The idea of burial kit was defined by Binford, later by Shai, and recently by Baker. It may be defined as a distinguishable assemblage of repetitive offerings common to all burials that were deposited with each interment. This kit must have been an integral part of the burial process. Its repetitive nature and uniformity confirms the existence of a formal ceremonial behavior. Objects found in mortuary context may be further subdivided into three classes: essential, personal, and status. The essential objects include vessels which were necessary for the mortuary ritual successor required for the well-being of the deceased spirit in the afterlife. These might have included vessels used in funerary ceremonies and meals, which would look also as a symbolic partakes of the dead and thus become essential. Personal objects represent the unique persona of the deceased. These could be, for example, possessions required by or have been used by the deceased. Objects of status could represent the deceased social rank or profession or both. So as I said, in spite of the difficulties, we can distinguish, we can discern a clear burial assemblage. And this is the components that are emerging from these burial caves. Those are pottery vessels, stone vessels and pallets, flint tools, ornaments, metal weapons and tools, and symbolic and ritual artifacts. If we analyze the analysis of these components show that there are some key elements that are common to all burial caves along the coastal plain. These are the bowls, the amphoriskoi, the juglets, the jugs, the spouted vessels, flint tools in small numbers yet to be found in almost all of the caves, and beads usually is a single, not usually, is a single item or necklaces. The most common is the carniole beads. Now, as you can see, these are the balls from variety of caves and burial sites. Here, regionality in its peak. As you can see, in the left plate, in the lower part, for example, we've got small bowls with spouts, which are unique to the central coastal plain. In the right plate, in the lower part, you can see the gray burnished ware, which are unique to the Sharon coastal plain. Yet, in spite of this regionality, the balls are the most common vessel in the burial assemblages in the burial kit. The closed vessels are is also interesting because the forms of amphoriscoe and juglets and spouted vessels are maintained, but the composition, the frequencies are changing along the subregions. Let us take two examples, Enos Awir, caves 3 and 20, dug by Yanai, and Azor, caves 1 and 4, dug by Bento. Enos Awir, of course, in the Sharon coastal plain, and Azor is in the central coastal plain. What we can see that in Enos Awir, the juglets comprise circa 50% of the assemblage, while amphoriscoe comprising 12%, and the spouted vessel, the Enos Awir teapots, comprise circa 5% of the assemblage. Contrary, in the central coastal plain, as always an example, the amphoriscoe comprise more than 40%, the juglets comprise 12%, and the spouted vessel comprise less than 5%. So what I wanted to say there, that the key elements are maintained, but the composition of the burial kit is changing from each sub-region. Another interesting phenomenon, the composition of each sub-region has parallels inland, east of the sub-region. For example, the Sharon coastal plain, the composition of the burial kit has parallels in Jezreel Valley, in the Megiddo tombs, and the Zorea burial site. The composition of the burial kit in the central coastal plain has parallels in the Shephelah region, the Central Hill Country, Jericho, and Samaria. Finally, in the northern coastal plain, the Oshrat burial site, for example, has local Galilean pottery and some parallels in the Sharon coastal plain, and some strong parallels to the central Jordan Valley in Tel Shalem. To the key elements of the burial kit, there are some non-redundant object supplemental items that could testify for the persona and status of the deceased. These are extremely rare in small numbers, mainly in the rich cemeteries. I want to argue for some functional and symbolic aspects of the pottery forms. Following the typological categories suggested by the excavators of Bab Edra Cemetery, I would like to offer four possible categories of function of pottery vessel that could be part of the funerary meal, or as Asaf said, a funerary banquet, although I don't know if they can be actually banquets. So for short-term storage, we've got the amphoriscoe, would be used for the jugs, some of the larger juglets. For food preparation, medium to large bowls with flat base that increase their stability, food substances could be mixed in them. For serving, medium to large bowls could also serve, especially the gray burnished bowls that you can see in the lower part of the plate, which are unique to the Tel Esur and the Sharon coastal plain. These are very, very common in this region. And for consumption, the small bowls and the spouted small bowls could be used. Another class of vessels that are a key element are the spouted vessels. Eh, the vessels with basket handles and wide funnel could be easily handled, and it was easy probably to pour with them liquids, and thus they also could be serving or consumption vessels. The tel esur, the spouted vessel, the teapots with the loop handle and the crooked spout are much, much more harder to handle. And this hints at that there might be some sort of a valuable substance or liquid inside of them. I would like to suggest that these vessels could also used for purification ceremonies before and after the funeral. And we've got also vessels of symbolic meaning, as Itzik was mentioned before when he was talking about small vessels. We've got small votive vessels, which are models of larger functional vessels. This might provision the dead in his long journey. They have cultic meaning. The actual meaning is not known. No residue analysis was done over the years. We also have in small numbers the gray burnished incense burner that could also used for libations. This one is characterized the Tel Esur cemetery, as I said, in small numbers. We also have some zoomorphic figurines, a small number of them, shaped in the as donkeys with two bags. Amiran in 1985 suggested that this was published one of these figurines and suggested that they represent the persona of the deceased and that they were merchants, and these donkeys were a means of transport and laden animals, etc., etc. So we have a production and trade of non-utilitarian vessels for mortuary practice. Some of the bowls, the small bowls, were well suited for mass production. In the central coastal plain, many of the amphoriskoi were used in a composite method, which is also well suited for mass production. So the EB IB period witnessed the evolvement of social mechanisms that had the ability and the power to direct resources and human energy for non-utilitarian purposes beyond daily life needs. Yet, the manufacture of vessels for burial purposes lies in a different kind of utilitarianism, one that may not bear immediate benefit, but rather a long-term investment in spiritual and social domains. The funerary ceremonies were fertile ground for social tensions and political manipulations. They allowed the living members to renew social obligations and solidarity, as well as to renegotiate a new socio-political order and social identities. Social connections and alliances were more probably were assessed, strengthened, and reaffirmed, while others were untied. We can assume that within this framework, some sort of conspicuous consumption was manifested. That is, communal meals in which large number of people could have participated, and in which some exhibition, we can assume that some exhibition of power and wealth gift exchange maybe took place. Moreover, conspicuous consumption is also manifested in the acquisition of or manufacture of some of the vessels and utensils that demanded investment in effort and energy. So what we've got so far is multiple, successive, collective, disarticulated burial. We've got burial sites with repetitive features. We have standardized burial kit that display a high degree of similarity and formality. And all of this suggests there was a conscious and intentional effort to exhibit no social differentiations. And I would like to suggest and argue that in this conscious and intentional effort was an ideological message of alleged equality after death. And
ניתן,
this,
יש לך עוד 4 דקות.
okay, so this ideological message for whom it meant for, sorry, the hidden nature of the burial caves. Together, they place in the landscape next to settlement sites, hints us that this message was meant for the burying community, that their ancestors were buried inside of the burial site. So does this alleged equality is a reflection of actual life? Or is it a false perception? I want to refer to some of Arke's observation about burial archaeology. Burials are not mirrors of life. If anything, they are a hall of mirrors, of life providing distorted reflection of the past. The greatest challenge for burial archaeology is to identify in each case the degree of the distortion, as well as to attempt to infer the reasons for such distortion. Let me remind you that there are some objects that are not key elements that are found in the rich cemeteries. This suggests that exceptions were made, rules were broken for some people that maintain the persona and status, the persona and the status after death. Briefly, I want to show you the ideas, the suggestion about the social organization of the EB1B. More and more in consensus these days that are Phillips and Chesson's suggestions of power sharing, either by kin groups or by houses, hierarchical, egalitarian hierarchy. This more and more becoming the consensus. So what we've got is a complex society, probably socially differentiated, has some social differentiations and some degree of inequality. So what is the distortion in the EB1 mortuary practices? The conscious and intentional effort to exhibit no social differentiations. And now we have to ask ourselves, why? So according to Greenberg, equality was used as a method by new emerging elite groups used in times of social change. Fundamentally, the concept of equality helps to conceal and obscure internal conflicts and separatism within society. And as such, the new elite groups are major beneficiaries of its advantages, and they will aspire to be perceived as part of the previous social order for gaining legitimacy. We can presume that social intensification during the EB1B period necessitated a new form of coping with social change. I would like to propose the distortion of false image of equality could be one of the measures taken to obscure and conceal possible internal tensions, conflicts, and struggles that social intensification could have caused. So if I will take you back to one of my first slides. So the EB1B burial customs were planned and organized. They were systematic, they were uniform, they were multiple and successive in secondary inhumations. And there was ideological message of equality, which is a distortion that intended for bearing community, which was probably had social differentiations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natan. And we will save the